going to have to redo my speech because you pretty much took most of it. I'll deal with that later. Right now, I'd like to introduce Tim Danziger. Is Tim here? And I just want just to preface everyone, Allen Park, class of 1968, okay? This is for throwing around the dates and everything, who graduated from Marshall. Go ahead, Tim. Thank you.
I'm still recovering from that. That's beautiful. Class of 82. Brian had a thing that whenever a song would come on the radio that he thought was one of his favorite top tens, he would yell out, "Classic!" And from what I remember, there were at least 100 of these that were top 10 classics. That was Brian. He was exuberant, opinionated, and unable to restrict his passion. I first met Brian, like a lot of students at Marshall High School, as a freshman at the Spirit Assembly. I didn't say really met him, I just became aware of him because suddenly he was there. And in the way that a lot of people have been accustomed to Brian and in the way that people have been talking about him, he was a presence, he was a powerful speaker, he was a motivator, he inspired us. He was the perfect person to be talking at a football rally. He was charismatic, he was energetic, he was bold, and he conveyed meaning when he spoke. I know he would be glad for me to make this reference. Yoko Ono once said about John Lennon that he was a heavy dude. And by that, she didn't mean that he was too serious. She meant that aside from his lightheartedness, he was also somebody who people took seriously. And when you were around him, you had that sense of him. And Brian was like that. As fun as he was, you took him seriously. 4 times a day, like clockwork, Brian would throw open the window to the bookstore, and I can still hear the metal rattle of that thing as it flies up. And it always sounded to me, and it seems to me when I was picking this week, that it was as if he was saying, "Bring it on." That, you know, grab yourself a pencil and some M&Ms and let's get started. And it was the way that he taught us, he coaxed us, he entertained us, he advised us, he scolded us, and he shaped us. He sure shaped me. I can't imagine that I would ever have made the choices I made in my life to pursue a creative profession if it hadn't been for Brian's knowledge about that kind of thing, about TV and music and movies. If it hadn't been for his passion and his support of that in me, it was certainly nothing I ever saw in myself. I was a very shy person. But he encouraged that. And I know that he encouraged things in many, many people. I admired Brian. To me, he was a role model of what a good man should be. He was a father figure when I was young. Later, he became my friend. And I kept in touch with him all these years. And no matter how much time had passed or how much space there was between us, I could pick up the phone with Brian and we would start in on a conversation like we had just hung up yesterday. My favorite memory of Brian is going to be of him telling a story before playing some music. He was so passionate about music, had so many memories and things involved with music, that it's almost like the happiest moment of his life was to share that with me. He was going to tell me about this, where he first heard this song, and then he was going to play it really loud. And it was when he was at his best. Brian was one of the cool teachers, and by that I mean that he was an adult, but he also knew our language, he knew our pop culture, he knew our music, and he related to us in a different way. He even directed class night. I mean, how cool is that, right? The show that satirizes the school and the other teachers, you know? But I know that when I think of Brian, I'm going to remember him as the person that, for all of what he did that was outward and that was big and that was in an assembly or part of a community, he was also just a good friend. I think if I could say one thing about Brian, I would say that his life was a classic.
And speaking of classics, at this time, I would like to invite Tom Reynolds. He's going to share a few words, maybe even offer up a special something that I remember back in my high school days during all of our pep assemblies. Maybe he'll offer up a classic ditty.
Is Benny the Jet Armstrong house? Dad, get out here.
There we go.
All right. We used to do a lot of little skits for the kids in school, and I have to tell you that this fella right here probably was about as good a sport because what we asked him to do was unbelievable. I'm just going to try and share a couple of quick things with you. We had what we call, well actually we had talked him into, we were trying to get some ideas to get the kids all pumped up for a big game. And we came up with, we were going to use him to show that he could punch and beat the opponent down, and we were going to win the game. So I got him going a little bit, and he came out and he started, the first group he went to was the sophomores. And he went over to those sophomores, and he's just throwing punches right and left, back and forth, and all of a sudden, boom, down he goes. He's underneath the bleachers. And I'm thinking, how are we going to get him out? And Matt Davis, I'll never forget it, Matt Davis, and I got to be honest with you, I'm on the ground. I'm laughing. I can't stop laughing. And Matt is laughing too. Matt's laughing every bit as much as I am. So he and another one of the kids actually rescued him from under the bleachers, didn't they, Dad? And that was one of our adventures. There was another one called The Great Race. Now, The Great Race pitted this gentleman here and Mrs. Hopkins. And so, basically, when I mentioned it to him originally, he says, I'm not going to do that. And I said, oh, wait a minute. You know, aren't you being unreasonable here? He says, no. He says, I'm fine. So, what did I do? I went on the announcements and goaded him into having a great race. And what really did it was she went on announcements and she called him a chicken-hearted Irishman, and he came back with, it's on. He said, no. So anyway, it comes the day of the race, and I'm giving them their pre-race instructions. And he's here like this. He's like this. His eyes are open, and he says, go ahead. So I tell him, whatever you do, watch out for the end of the building. Because I said, at that time, our things came out a little ways, and the doors, you had to run to the sides to get to the doors. So basically, I'm telling him all this, he doesn't hear a thing. He hears absolutely nothing. And so I also had told him, hey, he's got a towel. He's got a towel. And he comes out, and he starts around the gym. He's going around the gym, and he's waving his towel. He gets about halfway. Now he starts waving the towel, and he comes back, and he takes it, and he throws it at Kay's feet. And he goes like this to him. I go down. I'm laughing so hard, I go down. So I finally get back up, and we finally decide we're going to start the race. So we put them both, they both started in the center, but I told them, be sure you go to the outsides, so you don't run into the building. Well, we started them, boom, down he goes, he touches off on the black line, he's turning, he's coming back, and I mean, he is on the move. And he gets back, and he gets right to about here, and he jumps right into the building. I mean, boom, and down he goes. Now, again, I'm sorry to say, but I'm laughing. I can't even get up yet. So anyway, we finally get him up. It takes us about 2 minutes. That's probably pretty close, isn't it? All right. About 2 minutes, and he, all of a sudden, he decides he's hurt. And so they take him to the hospital, to the emergency room, and the first thing the lady asks him, she says, is this a something case? What was it?
Is this work-related?
Workers' compensation, that's what it was. And so when he comes back, he's so angry, he's blaming me because I gave him the proper instruction, but he didn't listen. He didn't hear a word of it. So what happens now is he won't speak to us for about 2 weeks. So, Danny, I just want to say I'm sorry. He really was a tremendous sport. We had a lot of fun with the things that we did. Brian basically was, you probably are going to have a real problem believing this, but he was always kind of suggesting things, doing this, be sure you do this, be sure you do that. Basically, he was in control. But we've had a great time, and we've been very, very blessed. We've had some tremendous people, and of course, he was as good as any, for sure. I'm going to read now. We have what we call little ditties. And the ditties were basically It's going to be a little tougher because I usually zing people in my ditties. I'm not going to zing him. We had a lot of fun, but I wanted to try and say some things that he would appreciate. He was born, the title, Superman. He was born and raised in Marshall. What a break for us. He seldom showed his temper, never made much of a fuss. He was a very gentleman, a friend for sure, you see. Whether you were rich or poor, he acted strongly, like a tree. There was Mom and Dad, Ellen, Jenny, Brian, and Mike. He was very proud of them all, even as a little tyke. The only thing they asked of him, the only thing they asked of them was to do their very best. They were a very strong family, but no better than the rest. He truly loved his music, and he was a gardener too. He loved to till the soil and grow flowers, sewer, violet and blue. His dogs were another love. He was so very proud to show. In fact, they were his feature act on the dais, don't you know? He retired in 2003, but stayed for 4 more years. He wanted to continue class night and fun things, changing gears. He worked his beloved concession stands because he loved to talk to all. He really didn't retire, my friends. He simply answered the call. By now you surely realize this man was no ordinary man. He loved to teach. He loved to help. He loved to have a plan. His goodness oozed out of him, never caring what the cause. He simply knew he would be there without envy or without flaws. Brian Burns was a man, a gifted one, I am sure. He never worried about the problem, only about the cure. He gave his life to MHS, a very noble stand indeed. He was not fraught with getting rich, attention, or especially greed. He was my friend. He was my pal. I will never deny that. He was the guy who always had the ability to never leave you flat. He was a problem solver, and thank God it never ceased. So Brian Burns, rest now, my friend. You've earned a heavenly peace. Thank you.
Everyone's up here messing up all my papers. At this point, Brian's sister, Jen, she wrote a little something that she wanted to read herself today, but it's been hard for Jenny. So I'm going to read this, and after I read this, Steve's going to play one of Brian's favorite songs that Jenny shared with us. And I'm sure you will all recognize it. This is in Jenny's words. Brian, you were not only my brother, but you were my mentor, my rock, and my best friend. I looked up to you more than anyone else in my life. I will always cherish the many memories we had. Rest in peace, big brother. I will love and miss you always. Signed, Booch. things that, it's like, and then after Joe, we're going to have Bob Curry come out and say a few words.
Well, how do you put into words what someone means to you? In the case of Brian, it's not easy, as he meant so many things to so many different people. Brian and I go back to my first day of freshman year. As I sat in his class and took it all in, I realized that he was unlike any teacher I'd ever had. His excitement and enthusiasm while teaching was so engaging, I thought to myself, this is someone I want to get to know. Luckily, I was given that opportunity, and for that, my life has been forever changed. Brian and I shared many good memories. I'm not sure if you all know this, but we had started our own club. We were co-presidents of the FF Club. Now, that stands for something a lot like Fat Fudge, but I'll let you decide what it really stands for. The FF Club is a Food and Life Appreciation Society. It's a very exclusive club. Brian and I inducted some people as honorary members, but most of them didn't even know it. Some of our mottos were, we can eat for a family of 4, and when asked if we like certain food items, the answer was always, well, does it fit in my mouth? As a rule, we would always do some of our best eating together. This was just one of the classic examples of the time that we shared. Brian was the kind of friend that could shoot me a look, and at any time I knew exactly what he was thinking. This was always fun, because a lot of the things that we were both thinking were best not spoken. One of the only times I got a look I was unable to decode was at a barbecue at my house a couple of summers ago. In classic Brian style, he would always call dinners and gatherings held at my house my do's. At this particular do, I had just gotten a few of those new fire gel burners for the deck to cut down on the bugs. They had been lit for a couple of hours, and the one sitting in front of Burns looks as if it had gone out and needed a refill. I went and grabbed the gel, started to pour the gel into the burner, and that's when it all went wrong. Apparently, the flame burns clear, and it was still lit. Because it was still lit, the refill container ignited and shot gel like a fire hose all over the place. Now, this wouldn't have been a big deal if the container wasn't pointed directly at Brian's face. He was covered in the fuel gel and was probably even on fire for a minute. I don't even remember. At this point, my heart sunk deep into my chest, and I was sure that he would be blind for the rest of his day. Remember how I said I had gotten a look from him after that incident that I wasn't able to decode? Well, now that I think about it, the meaning behind that look is a lot clearer, and again, is definitely something that's better non-verbalized. My group of friends and I started a tradition probably about 10 years ago that we call Family Christmas. Each year, around the holiday, we all get together and spend a night catching up and sharing laughs. Everyone would always bring a dish to pass, and all I remember from year to year was how stressed Burns would get about what he should bring for a dish to pass. He would always show up with the most random things. One year, it was frozen Swan's vegetables. After that happened, we came to a mutual understanding that I would take care of the food, and the only thing that was important to me was that he showed up. For the years that he was in California, we would all FaceTime with him and pass the phone around the room because the evening would not be the same without him. Even though he wasn't good at bringing a dish to pass, his gift for the gift exchange was always one of the most sought after. Over the past few days, I've been going through some of my text and Facebook messages from him and would like to share with you some of the classics. After Sister Ellen passed away, I had one of my famous do's at my house. His friend George was in town and was able to come over and experience our group of friends. That night, after Burns got home, he sent me this message. George was very impressed with you and your house and your life. You are a classic, and I am glad you are in my life. Co-presidents of the Worldwide FF Club. That's how we roll, and rightly so. I would pick him up and we would go places together, whether it was Ann Arbor to visit Mark over dinner, or just an open house of a mutual friend. After I dropped him off from going to our friend Jordan's open house, he sent me this text. Thanks for carting Grandpa around to the kids' dues. It is good to get him out now and then. Be careful. I know you were waiting to get me out of there before the keg stands and random sex started. And rightly damn so. I always learned a lot of life lessons from him. He was able to relate and help me see things from a different view. One thing he told me was, there's a lot of peace and serenity when you aren't trying to be everything to everybody. Being good to yourself is best and not selfish when you think about it. And then this one was out of the blue. No texts or conversations were exchanged that day before he proclaimed to me, "Damn it, Joe, you know how much I love pie." I maybe have a reputation for not responding to texts the quickest, and my friends can probably attest to that. One afternoon, he texted me this after seeing a picture on Facebook. He said, "That is the single best picture on Facebook ever. You peeking through the curtain needs to be in a effing museum so it can be seen by the world forever. Real talk." After I responded, he came back with me, "Stunned to hear back from you, LOL. Texted Mayor today also. 1 out of 2 of you is pretty good." That picture is truly, he said, "That picture is truly in my all-time Hall of Fame classic pictures. And I don't mean goon pictures, we have plenty of those, but that picture is priceless and I love it." Messages like this would make my day and will truly be missed. Brian taught me to live every day, and in his words, enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. All I can do now is walk in the world for him and ensure that his memory lives on. As a proud member of the FF Club, I can assure you that he will be in my thoughts every day and will continue to guide me throughout what lies ahead.
Words from Bob Curry.
For the record, class of 1969 and born in Oakland Hospital. I don't know if Ian and Bill did this purposely or not, but being one of the latter speakers and perhaps one of the oldest friends of Brian seemed to be kind of appropriate to me. I've known Brian practically all my life, and I spent a portion of my life feeling like I was a part of the Burns family and part of the Albersey family. And there were so many memories when I first heard about Brian that came out, and a high percentage of those were not appropriate to talk to you and to present to you today. But I'd like to kind of present a little side of Brian that maybe hasn't been talked about quite so much today. And Bill, if I steal more of your thunder, I apologize because most of mine was completely gone. But Brian and I knew each other back in college days, and yes, I was there as a part of that protest. And much in the way Brian's parents reacted, my mother, who didn't know I had left Western Michigan University to be on Marshall High School campus, happened to go by while I was holding a protest sign with Brian, and she honked. So I have some unique memories of Brian, and one of them that I really would like to share with you, and I think he would clearly think this is fair game and appropriate. And probably the statute of limitations has long passed on whether or not I can say this about Brian. But Brian was in our wedding, and so Mary and I were very close friends with him for a lot of years, and spent a lot of time together. And one of the events that she first said to me, "Well, you know what you ought to talk about is that infamous story about Brian. And I said, well, I don't know. So here goes. The story is going to involve Brian, a pine tree, a bottle of rum, and a nurse. Okay. So I hope you're ready for this. This goes back to college days, and we had, it was in the summer, and we were just kind of hanging out, and happened that my parents were out of town, so the party was at my house. And so Brian, a lot of you probably, in the years that you knew Brian, he didn't drink much, or had a hard time picking drinks. Well, he was struggling that night, and he landed on rum. So Brian bought a bottle of rum and started making rum and cokes, and decided he really liked rum and cokes. So that's the Brian and the bottle of rum part. In front of my house was a very, very large pine tree. That's going to play into the story in a moment. And then next door was the shift supervisor for Oakland Hospital, a nurse who lived next door. So the night went on, proceeded as those kinds of evenings do, and eventually Brian decided he and his bottle of rum were going to go outside and look at the stars and just kind of relax. And we didn't see Brian for quite some time. In fact, pretty much all night. And so all of a sudden, Brian comes bursting through the door, and he starts telling this story. And one of the other speakers talked about how he seemed to embellish stories, but they really were true. Well, this was really true. So Brian's out there laying under the pine tree, sleeping. And this very well-meaning nurse, on her way to her early morning shift at Oakland Hospital, walks by the house, sees Brian laying there, thinks, oh no. Comes up to him, shakes him, young man, are you okay, are you okay? And Brian looks up, sees the nurse in the beautiful white cap against the pine tree, and says, it's Christmas and I'm in the hospital? How did this happen? True story. And he loved to tell that story over and over again, so I think it's fair game to tell it today. I want to thank Ian in particular for inviting me to be a part of this celebration of Brian's life. He meant so much to so many, and I purposely kept the word classic and the word goon out of my remarks because I knew that they would be said over and over again. But this is such a great tribute to a great man, a longtime friend, a person who cared so much about so many. And it is a celebration of his life, but I gotta tell you, the thing that I think of, and the words I'd like to say to Brian right now, damn it, Brian, you started the celebration way too early. Thank you.
At this point, we're going to play a song, another song by CeCe Winans. And I'm sorry, it's not CeCe Winans. I'm sorry. It is a song called I Find Your Love, and it is by Beth Nielsen Chapman, who Brian loved. He and Ellen and I went to see Beth Nielsen Chapman play at Kellogg one time, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with her music, but it's very, very beautiful music. When the music is ended, Kathy Tribbiano, my wife, which Brian was in our wedding also, she and Jim Gladstone, who both were class of '66, they were two of many people in the class of '66 that did not get a class night. So this is sort of their tribute to Brian for the 66 classmate. You can join us now. I'm sorry, verse and song. Thanks. That's what Brian will tell you. Listen to the words.
I'll catch your smile on someone's face. You're whispering the wind's embrace through diamond stars and songs of dreams. I find your love in everything. The sun, the sky, love, rolling seas, all conspire to comfort me from sorrow's edge. Life's beauty seems to find your love in I've come to trust and hold your grace to find your love in everything. Even as I fall apart, even through my shattered heart, I'll catch your smile on someone